someone who was there when the W3C was being founded in 1994, it is really exciting for me to see that they're continuing to remain relevant, and as the web is extending its influence, it's growing there. Okay, we now have sort of the entire landscape, all the things we need to think about. Now we can actually start to think about what they mean in practice. What does IoT mean for our cities, and in particular, what does it mean for the city of Sydney? Because it's clear that smart cities are part of the future. We're probably a bigger part of our present than we recognize. What is that future? What's the path that gets us there? To answer these questions, please welcome the City of Sydney's Manager of Strategic Corporate Planning, Andrea Beattie.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today. For those of you who I haven't already met, my role at the City is to review and keep updated the City's strategic plan, Sustainable Sydney 2030. And as well, I'm involved in the strategy and policy development that springs from this overarching plan, and which together provide the roadmap to deliver on the city's aspirations. So in thinking about today, I actually really want to share with you some of the city's priorities and some of the challenges that we face, so that you're actually in a better position to identify opportunities that will benefit both the people we serve and of course benefit you and your organisation. So in a room full of technology specialists, I'm not really going to focus on how we use technology at all, but rather I'm going to drill down further into the value we place on data and information and how we use it to plan for our city and deliver services to the community. In doing that, I'm going to look at one of our unique data sets, how we collect that data, how we've historically used it, and how that is set to evolve as we use the data set as a platform for our first open data pilot project. And from that, hopefully, that will inspire you to think about using that data set in ways we've not even yet considered. And when we're in a position to allow it, how you might link data from all sorts of other sources to actually overlay on that platform. And I'm also sure that you'll see many opportunities to change the way we collect and make better use of data in this exciting future of the Internet of Things. So just a quick snapshot of the city. So the City of Sydney covers a small area, around 26 square kilometres. We've got a population of about 200,000 residents, but it's rapidly growing, and that's one of the key trends in the city. In the 1980s, our resident population was only 50,000, so you can see the growth trajectory that we're on. And we've got growth in both employment and in residential uses of the city, and that's one of the sort of competing and complementary challenges that we face. We're also in the middle of delivering one of Australia's largest urban renewal project, Green Square, which by 2030 will house 60,000 new residents. And every weekday we plan for and deliver services to the 1.2 million people who are in our city or who come here, whether it's to visit, to work here, to run their business, to live here, or just to pass through. Now, it's an important city because the economic output of this area, although tiny, represents about 7% of national GDP. So what we do here matters. And this map also highlights one of the connectivity challenges that Sydney faces and the complex governance structures that make up metropolitan Sydney and even our local area. So there's no one level of government that's got responsibility for this 26 square kilometres. Within it, areas are controlled by the Barangaroo Authority, Darling Harbour Live, the former Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority, the multiple agencies that are involved in Circular Quay, where they're the trains, the port authorities, the ferries, and the list goes on. The Sydney Opera House Trust, the Botanical Gardens, Centennial Park Trust. It's a long list in a tiny area. And of course, most of the buildings and assets in this area are privately owned. So that, in this Internet of Things challenge, is one of the complexities. And I could take that out further across metropolitan Sydney. All three levels of government are playing in this area. We used to have 41 councils, and through the reform process that's underway, but it's still got a number in the 20s. So working through that complexity is really key to the future success of our city. And, you know, there is some optimism. Although it's in their infancy, the prospects for coordinated planning across metropolitan Sydney has actually improved with the establishment of the Greater Sydney Commission. And of course, we shouldn't undervalue the role of collaboration. We're currently working with all of those councils in the state government on a project at the moment. And I think that's probably the first time that we're all working towards the same end in the one project. So finding that way through that complexity, that's a key challenge, but we're here to play our role, and we do see our role as one of a leadership and of a facilitator and collaborator. Now, everything we do at the City is grounded in Sustainable Sydney 2030. It was first adopted in 2008, and as I said, I'm responsible for keeping it continually updated and refreshed. It sets out a bold vision for the future of our city, one that's economically prosperous, environmentally sustainable, culturally alive, and where the community is connected, engaged, and has a high quality of life regardless of income. Importantly, it was developed with the community, so they've got a big stake in it. But it recognises that everyone's got a stake in our shared future, and the only way we'll achieve it is through that partnership and collaboration. Needless to say, everything we do stems from and must deliver on Sustainable Sydney 2030. And if we want to distill it into 3 words, no, it's not a 3-word slogan. We've been around for a long time using these 3 words. It's really green, global and connected. And like any good city strategy, if we were actually developing it now, it would actually be called a smart city strategy because it looks at the way people move through the city. It's about integrated transport. It's about, city for walking and cycling, sustainable development, cultural and creative. That connectivity flows through everything. But what it didn't do was talk about the role of technology in this urban environment because this was developed almost 10 years ago now. So we've done some work behind the scenes to address that, and in the next edition, which we'll be taking to Council next year, you'll see that articulated and expressed in much more detail. Everything we do, we hold to ourselves to account to the community. 2030's got 10 targets in it. Just one of those is to reduce carbon emissions by 70% by 2030. Now, that's not just the carbon emissions from our own operation, but that's the carbon emissions across that entire local government area, over which we have essentially no control. The reason we did that, set this as one of our 10 targets, because we know that cities are major contributors to rising carbon emissions. And because in Sydney's case, this is because how our energy is generated. And as I said, transparency and measuring and reporting is a crucial role that the city plays. And so that openness of information, we use it to motivate and cause behaviour change. We use it to track progress and to make sure that we are following through on our commitments. As I said, I'd move into talking about one of our key data sets, and then I'll bring these back together with our sustainability agenda. So the Floor Space and Employment Survey is a piece of work we've been doing every 5 years since the 1970s. And you can imagine how that was very paper-based back in the 1970s, now online. It's something that we've done that allows us to understand the activity inside every property in the city. So you can see there, the different colour codes show residential use, commercial use, and public open space, and that's just to orient you towards the city. Now, it's a complete census every 5 years of the commercial uses of the city. So this room, for example, would appear in this model. We would be able to understand the capacity of this room, the nature of its activity. If it's commercial business activity, we'd link it to the ANZIC codes so that we're able to align our data with federally, with the ABS and census data. It's a full census, so we gather this information through observation. So every 5 years, we send a big team of surveyors out to actually enter the premises and track some key data sets around usage, occupation, capacity. For residential premises, obviously, we don't go in to those. But we build the models up using the floor plans that each of you, if you've been involved in the development application process, that you're required to submit to the city. So any floor plans through a DA get brought up into this data set, and then we go out every 5 years. And it allows us to build essentially a 3D model of the city from the inside out. It'll show us building data, the number of units, the number of hotel rooms, when it was built. We do track the business name, although we don't talk about, this is not a CRM and it's not able to be used in any way like that. The industry, the years of operation, the description of the space use, the employment and the capacity. We share the data with other people, and we obviously publish all of our analysis. We share it with the New South Wales Government for emergency services use, but you have not had access to it in its original form yet. It's a really interesting data set. We use it to plan for the city. So 5 yearly collections of data works for us. When you think about land use planning, a whole commercial development cycle might take 40 years for the planning controls set at a strategic level for people and property owners to take up the capacity offered by those planning controls. So we need to see how our city is moving and changing, but only in big chunks of time. That's historically how we've used it. Can you imagine? I'm not even sure that we've imagined yet. What if this data were available in real time? And that's where I'm hoping that some of you in the room might have solutions for some of these challenges. The data collection is time-consuming and it's incredibly expensive. If we were starting this now, I'm not sure that we would as a city. But because we've got continuity of data every 5 years since the 1970s, it's too valuable a data set to actually give up. One of the other challenges with this is that this exists only for the City of Sydney. So if you're imagining a solution that you can roll out across metropolitan Sydney, no other councils do this. So somehow that sort of adaptability and availability of data is crucial as we take our way forward. And of course, privacy is an obvious consideration for us as we make this available. So we're afforded generous access to commercial properties because historically, in the way that we've used this data for our policy making and published as reports, no one business has able to be identified. But of course, you know, and we know that if we make this data set available, then the potential for sort of rebuilding and identifying businesses is pretty high. In some parts of the city, for example, when you go down to sort of industry sub-classifications, we might only have 1 or 2 businesses in those classifications, so you'd know exactly who they were. So if you think of the retail sector, I think there's a department stores classification. Well, we've got 2. We've got Myers and David Jones. So, sort of being able to protect those businesses and others like it, once you start sort of reconstructing data, has made us cautious and, it will continue to make us cautious when we release this. But start to release it, we are. So we're actually working on an environmental sustainability platform. And as I said earlier, the monitoring of our environmental performance is crucial for us. And we're very good at monitoring, our organisation's performance. We are the first carbon neutral council. We were the first carbon neutral council in Australia, and we continue to do that accredited program each year. But it's in the area of what's happening to emissions in the city that this data is so crucial. You can see the topics that we're looking at through all of our environmental work, whether it's carbon, water, climate change and climate change adaptation, waste, the greening of the urban environment, and transport. So our environmental sustainability platform draws data from a number of internal and external sources, such as Ausgrid, Sydney Water and Gemina Gas. So when we get those third parties' data together with the spatial dimension that we have through the floor space and employment survey, and with data from our own programs that we actually get some interesting analytics and understanding of the city. And in the end, the sort of the final stage will be, in fact, how we visualise that data. And the next phase after that is we're actually looking at working with UTS or other organisations around the installation of sensors to collect further data sets. So this is just the beginning, if you like, but it's an important first step for us. And it's significant, not because we saw technology and a way of using it with our existing data set, but it started with a very real problem. How do we actually use data and use information to transform behaviour? And making things transparent does, in our experience, change behaviour. From our programs that we run in the environmental space, commercial building owners a small group of commercial building owners collectively own half the commercial property in Sydney. They're competitors in their normal commercial building space, but they're collaborators in achieving and their commitment to our sustainability goals. So the transparency around the outcome and the achievements in those programs really drives further innovation and further collaboration in what is generally a competitive space. So just to go a little deeper, so we're taking the raw consumption data that we've got from the utilities companies, and that's given us historically it's given us sort of theoretical data. We've been able to construct predictive models. But this time we'll actually be using data that we've taken, actual data from our program areas, because we are working with these commercial building owners and with their tenants, and calibrating that so that actual data is calibrated with the predictive data set. We'll be able to break down energy profile by source, whether it's electricity, transport, gas and waste, and of course break it down over time, spatially by postcode, and then compare that to the actual data from the program participants. And you can see this is where that spatial element comes in. These programs, so the Better Buildings Partnership, as I said, they have all, the building owners in that group have signed up to the 70% emissions reduction. I think they're up to 26% decrease off 2006 levels, so a significant gain. They're aiming for 70%. The City Switch is a commercial office program for tenants that started in the City of Sydney, now a national program. They're also making significant contributions. So what this data is going to tell us is where we go to next. So smart green apartments are next for us, and then other parts of the city. And it'll also mean that the rest of the community can understand where those changes have been made. They'll be able to gather data through their dashboard. And once we overlay with other people's data, that's when it gets really exciting. So early 2017 is the first release. But beyond that, there are real opportunities. There is, how do we expand this data set? Imagine if we could, as I said, collect our data in real time. Imagine the potential for no other sort of spatial pattern that maps who's in the city and what they're doing. That would be amazing. Overlay that with whether it's data around temperature, air quality, pedestrian movement. There's something there for all of us. You can see this image, one area we're particularly interested in is mapping heat and the effects of heat in our city, because climate change adaptation is a key thing. This sort of work's incredibly expensive. We do it very infrequently. But again, we'd love to understand on a real-time basis the sort of impact that things like our tree planting program are happening to the heat of the city. So in conclusion, it's fair to say that the city is a data-rich organisation. We've always been data-driven, and we've got some unique data sets, and I've just shown you one of those, that have got way more potential for their use than we've even imagined. And I'm also sure that collectively, you've got so many different ways that you're already thinking about how we can access the data we need more efficiently and effectively through the application of technology. And I think its value can only increase when it's combined with data from sources beyond our own. But just a cautionary tale before you all pick up the phone to sell me your product or pitch your ideas. Remember that the city is constrained by the Local Government Act in how we procure goods and services, and that was referred to earlier. So you need to be prepared to work with us a little more slowly than you'd like to, but I'm sure you'll get there in the end. Governance of our area of metropolitan Sydney is complex, but it's not insurmountable. And a significant role that we can and do play is in coordination and facilitation. And another significant role is really that collaboration with the state government. And I know Minister Dominello spoke to you today. He's really crucial as a player in this because he's the one who, for us, unlocks all of that archaic regulation that doesn't allow the innovation that we actually strive for. Maintenance of privacy and security of data is not negotiable from our perspective. And everything that we're interested in as a city must deliver on the outcomes and targets set out in Sustainable Sydney 2030. Thank you.